There are meetings that feel like they've come at the wrong place, the wrong time. An awkward blind date, a single mother rushing in with her little boy, a CEO who seemed the very definition of untouchable solitude. Yet fate has a habit of choosing those very moments to rewrite the story. When a child's innocent words echo the ones that once pulled a man back from despair, past and present, blur into something that feels like a miracle. Sometimes all it takes is a single hug to mend two broken hearts. The restaurant was tucked between Manhattan's glittering glass towers, a small refuge amidst the city's gleam. A chandelier spilled pools of soft light, mingling with the low hum of a saxophone. The night should have been peaceful, but Emily Parker's heart raced like a musician stumbling out of rhythm. She stepped inside her hand, wrapped tightly around the smaller hand of her son. Matthew was only 5, his scuffed red sneakers tapping a steady beat against the tiled floor. Emily's simple white dress fluttered with the draft from the door, her golden hair pinned back, though a few rebellious strands clung to her cheek in the damp air. She looked like a woman, still beautiful but weary, like a rose that carried its fragrance even after the bloom had passed. Her gaze moved from table to table until it found him. Nathan Hale. The man her friend had arranged for her to meet. He looked exactly as he had in the photo she'd been shown. Sharp features, a perfectly tailored suit, eyes the color of the sky just before a storm. He sat upright, one hand resting on the table, calm and distant all at once. Emily drew in a breath and led Matthew toward him. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice unsteady. "I couldn't find anyone to watch him. If you'd prefer." "You remind me of—" Matthew's small voice cut in, his wide eyes fixed on Nathan. "You remind me of the man in the park. Are you not sad anymore?" The question halted Nathan as though the whole room had paused to hold its breath. That tone, that tilt of the head, the curious unguarded eyes, it struck straight into a wound he had thought long buried. 2 years ago, on a night of relentless rain, Nathan had sat alone on a soaked bench in Central Park. His suit clung to his skin, a cold bottle heavy in his hand, and his heart was hollow, emptied of everything it once held. The world had been nothing but sheets of rain, and a man who had lost it all. And then, like a strange miracle, came the sound of small footsteps splashing through puddles. A boy in a crooked raincoat, rubber boots far too big, held out a crumpled tissue. His voice, thin but steady, broke the night. "Mom says, when you're sad, a hug is enough." Nathan hadn't been able to reply. Those simple words had pierced through the weight of darkness, pulling him back from the brink. He had never forgotten that voice. Never. It had haunted him for 2 years, a quiet ember burning through the cold. And now, here it was again, at this warmly lit table. The boy had no idea he had once been someone's lifeline. Nathan's chest tightened, then slowly loosened into a trembling smile. "Don't apologize," he said, his eyes never leaving Matthew. "The truth is, I think I owe your son more than you realize." Emily's lashes fluttered. "What do you mean?" Nathan shook his head gently as if to tuck the words away for another time. "Please, sit." She pulled out a chair for Matthew and sat across from Nathan. The boy immediately opened a box of crayons and began doodling on the children's menu, carefree as if this were any ordinary evening. Nathan watched the messy, colorful circles with an unreadable expression. "He's adorable," Nathan murmured. Emily's smile softened her face. "He's my whole world." In that moment, the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations melted into background noise. Emily stirred her tea, unsure of where to begin. How long had it been since she'd last been on a date? Could this even be called one? "Is he always this thoughtful?" Nathan leaned closer, watching Matthew help pick up a fallen spoon. "What do you mean?" "He feels things, deeply, too deeply for his age." Emily looked at her son, her gaze warm. "Yes. Even as a baby he cried when another child cried, as though he carried a compass that only pointed toward other people's sorrow." Nathan smiled faintly, though his eyes carried something heavier. Emily turned her cup, unease prickling at her. "I hope he's not a bother. I almost canceled tonight, but he's no bother, and neither are you." Emily stilled. How long had it been since someone had said that to her? The words were simple, but they spread through her chest like a tide of warmth. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. "Look, Mom," Matthew beamed, holding up his drawing. This is you, me, and him. 3 stick figures beneath a bright sun. One with golden hair, one in a tie, and a smaller one holding a balloon. Nathan's chest swelled unexpectedly with warmth. Emily gave a soft, embarrassed laugh. He draws everyone. He never leaves anyone out. Nathan tilted his head, smiling gently. I feel honored. And just like that, the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was safe, wrapped in the tender cocoon of the little restaurant's golden light. Emily leaned back, cradling Matthew as he rested against her shoulder. Nathan sat opposite, watching them, something shifting inside him. Sometimes a 5-year-old can save a life, and sometimes the universe brings that child back to remind grown-ups how to begin again. 2 years ago, the little classroom in Brooklyn was always filled with the scent of crayons and craft paper. Emily Parker stood at the whiteboard, chalk dust on her fingers, surrounded by the bright laughter of second graders. Teaching wasn't just her job. It was her refuge, the place where she belonged, the rhythm of joy that dulled her weariness. But on that day, Emily didn't go to school. Her throat was sore, nothing more than a light cold. She asked her husband, Daniel, to collect Matthew from preschool. Such a small request, harmless, ordinary. Yet, it was in that moment her whole world shattered. The rain came down in torrents, drenching the intersection. A truck skidded on the slick road out of control. The phone call from the hospital tore Emily's universe apart in seconds. Daniel never came home. She still remembers the sound of the phone slipping from her hand, the way Matthew's small face lifted and asked, "Why isn't Daddy home yet?" Mum. That night she buried her sobs into her pillow so her son wouldn't hear her heart break. The loss didn't just destroy Emily's heart, it rewrote her entire life. At first she told herself she would take a short leave from teaching, but the thought of passing by the desk where Daniel always left her morning coffee made her chest seize. The thought of standing before her pupils, forcing a smile while hollow inside, made her realize she wasn't strong enough to return. Bills stacked up. Sleep abandoned her. The house, once brimming with laughter, grew as silent as a grave. Emily found work in a small neighborhood bookshop, a quiet place where nobody asked anything of her beyond simply being there. On quiet days, she brought Matthew along. Each time the same words slipped from her lips. Sorry, he's a bit fussy today. Or, sorry, I'll have to leave early. Sorry. The word fastened itself to her voice. Sorry for the inconvenience. Sorry for the sadness. Sorry for existing. Her parents tried to help, but grief made strangers of them. Daniel had been their pride, their shining light. Now, though they never said it, Emily felt the heavy press of their disappointment, their silent blame. Friends fell away, invitations faded, and Emily endured. She had only Matthew left. The one person who still saw her, whole, not broken, not diminished. One evening, as Emily forced a smile over a plate of burnt pasta, Matthew tugged her sleeve. "Mum, are you really happy when you smile like that?" The question stopped her cold. She kissed his forehead, instead of answering, swallowing the ache into silence. Matthew had always been like that, uncannily sensitive. When she was tired, he would bring her a cookie. When she cried, he would climb onto her lap and hold her tightly wordless. Invisible threads binding her to the world, keeping her from falling apart. Matthew was the reason she woke each morning, scribbled to-do lists, paid bills one by one, and faced the days she wanted to hide from. He was the piece of Daniel she still carried, and something even greater, a living proof that Emily had to go on. And yet guilt crept in like ivy. She apologized when she took Matthew to the bookshop. She apologized when she was late to pick him up from preschool. She apologized for unanswered invitations, for speaking her loneliness aloud. It wasn't just the pain of losing Daniel. It was the pain of losing herself, the bright, hopeful woman who once was now only a shadow, trying to live enough for her son. Some days, she believed she was strong. Most days, she felt like a ghost wearing her own skin. Still, she walked on because Matthew needed her. Even when the world made her feel invisible, even when whispers stung like needles, she stood tall for her boy. Emily Parker was not fearless. She was not perfect. She had screamed when she wanted to whisper, wept beneath the shower, fumbled over every bill, but she was there. And every night, once Matthew had drifted to sleep, she kissed his forehead and whispered the only apology that mattered. I'm sorry this world is so cruel, but I promise, I'm still trying. And in the soft haze of dreams, Matthew would sometimes murmur back, eyes closed, voice sure. I know. 2 years ago, rain poured down on Central Park as though it meant to wash the whole city away. Cold drops drummed against the trees, the benches, and the soaked suit of Nathan Hale. He sat motionless, head in his hands, a bottle of whiskey slick in his trembling grip. His phone had died, just as his hope had. Only hours earlier, he had walked out of a boardroom with his name struck from the company he had built. His co-founder, once his brother, in all but blood, had betrayed him. And to complete the collapse, Madison, the woman he had planned to propose to, had walked away, leaving only the cruel chill of her words. I can't stay on a sinking ship. And Nathan believed her, believed he was the ship, splintering, sinking. That park bench in the storm was meant to be the end. The rain disguised his tears. The wind toyed with him like invisible hands. No one would notice if he simply disappeared. He sat for hours, his suit heavy, his heart heavier still. Inside him, silence screamed with the voices of failure. He had no fight left. Then came footsteps. Small, splashing footsteps, uneven in their rhythm. A little boy, no more than 4 or 5, stood before him, clutching a crumpled tissue. His coat was crooked, his rubber boots far too big, his nose running, but his eyes, God, his eyes, were gentle, steady, impossibly kind. It's okay to cry, the boy said, his voice as light as thread, yet cutting straight through Nathan's darkness. Mum says, when you're sad, all you need is a hug. Nathan lifted his head. Rain and tears slid down his face. The words sliced open the suffocating night inside him. A simple truth spoken by a fragile voice had reached the place he thought long dead. He never knew why the boy had stopped. He didn't ask where his mother was. He only knew that small hands had offered him a tissue. Nathan took it trembling. The boy smiled, then turned and ran toward a woman holding an umbrella in the distance. Her face was hidden, but her hand reached out to her son, steady, certain, full of love. Nathan remained clutching the damp tissue like an anchor. He did not open the bottle. That night he went home, pulled out a blank notebook, and for the first time in weeks he wrote, a spark of an idea. Technology that could understand human emotion, artificial intelligence that could do more than read data. It could feel, listen, and comfort. That spark became his lifeline. And for 2 years, he thought of the boy, the child who had given him a hug made of words, a small miracle that pulled him back from the edge. Now, in the golden glow of the restaurant, Matthew, Emily's son, looked up at him, his eyes bright, his voice innocent. You look like the man in the park. Are you still sad? Nathan's heart stopped. It was him. It could only be him. He steadied his voice, forcing a smile. Don't apologize, he told Emily, though. His eyes stayed fixed on Matthew. The truth is, I think I owe your son more than you know. He didn't explain. Not yet. But as he watched the boy draw dinosaurs with a broken crayon, humming a tune he invented on the spot, Nathan felt something he hadn't touched in years. Gratitude. And beneath it, something even rarer, hope. The next day he sent a short email. Dinner. No pressure? How about the 3 of us? Emily read it, hesitating. Then she handed the phone to Matthew. He grinned wide and certain and asked, so that means he likes us, right? Emily smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I think it means he wants to know us better. And in that moment, a tender seed unfurled within the 3 of them, like a green shoot finding fertile ground, ready to grow into something new, something alive. The little Italian restaurant tucked itself between 2 weathered brownstones, its golden light spilling across the rain-slick pavement. The air outside carried a whisper of basil-ripe tomatoes and melting cheese, enough to make passers-by turn their heads. Inside, candlelight flickered against wooden tables, simple and warm, more like a family kitchen than a dining place for strangers. Nathan was already at a corner table, not in his sharp suit this time, but in a white shirt, a navy jumper layered above it. He rose the moment Emily and Matthew stepped in. He crouched first to help Matthew into a leather chair, only then turning with a smile for Emily. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "Thank you for asking." She replied a small nod, accompanying the words. Dinner began with polite conversation. Matthew, delighted with the mountain of spaghetti placed before him, announced solemnly, "This is way better than Mom's. But don't tell her." Emily laughed, truly laughed without hesitation or self-consciousness. And Nathan was momentarily undone, captivated by the way her eyes crinkled when she did like sunlight, breaking through clouds. He listened as Matthew launched into tales of dinosaurs. Every detail about the horns of the Triceratops, the spiked tail of the Stegosaurus. Strangely, Nathan found he didn't tire of it. Few people could sit through a child's endless stories with patience. But he wasn't pretending. He was listening. When Emily slipped away to the restroom, she paused in the narrow hallway just as Nathan's voice drifted toward her. "I think your mum is very strong," he whispered. Matthew tilted his head, whispering back, "She doesn't think so." "Maybe one day," Nathan said gently, "she'll see herself the way I see her." Emily's chest tightened. Such a small exchange, yet it stirred something inside her she hadn't dared touch in a long time. After dinner, Nathan suggested, "There's a park nearby. Matthew might like the fountain." So they walked beneath a sky still damp from rain, the street lamps casting shimmering pools of light on the pavement. Matthew dashed ahead, chasing tree shadows, his laughter echoing. Emily and Nathan walked side by side, close enough for her to hear his breathing. "You seem different tonight," Emily said, half curious, half unsure. He glanced at her, smiling lightly. "Different how?" Lighter. A small true laugh escaped him. "Maybe I am." They stopped when Matthew crouched mesmerized by a squirrel. Then suddenly he looked up and asked, "Uncle Nathan, are you lonely?" The question struck like an arrow. Nathan froze, then bent until his eyes met the boy's. "I used to be," he answered honestly. Matthew nodded as though that explained everything and ran off again. Emily watched warmth spreading through her chest. She wasn't sure what moved her more, Nathan's answer or the unflinching way he spoke it to her child. Later, as Emily helped Matthew wash his hands in the park restroom, Nathan stood alone by a wooden bench near the hedges. She returned just in time to hear his voice low into his phone. "It's been weeks now. The nightmares haven't come back. Not since I met them." A pause. "No, I haven't told her yet. But I know I'm not the same man anymore." Emily stood still behind the hedge, her heart hammering. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Nathan carried a darkness, and somehow, through Matthew, through her, he was finding his way out. When he turned and caught her gaze, he flinched slightly. "You okay?" "Yes," she whispered. They said nothing more. They walked back to the street, Emily holding Matthew's hand, Nathan beside them, silent, steady, as though learning how to exist without needing words. For the first time in years, a small, trembling thought lit inside Emily's heart. Perhaps this wasn't just dinner. Perhaps this was a beginning. After dinner, Nathan had made an unusual invitation. "Tomorrow I'd like to take you and Matthew to where I work. Not the office, but the place where I've kept a part of my heart." Emily hesitated, not quite understanding, but his eyes were so honest that she found herself nodding. The next day, when the car stopped before a sleek glass building on the edge of the city, she felt a ripple of surprise. The polished sign bore the name of a technology company she had heard on the news, but never imagined stepping inside. Nathan was waiting in the lobby, his smile warm but tinged with nerves. He led them down a corridor gleaming with light. "I want you to see the thing that kept me going through my darkest days," he said softly, his voice echoing faintly in the quiet. Emily tightened her grip on Matthew's hand, curiosity mixing with a flicker of unease. Matthew, on the other hand, skipped along, as though about to enter a magical kingdom. The laboratory was drenched in white light, its glass walls reflecting rows of flickering screens. The tapping of keyboards and the hum of machines blended into a cold, mechanical rhythm. Emily walked in with Matthew, both of them wide-eyed. "It's impressive," she murmured, her gaze sweeping the room. Nathan smiled, but instead of looking proud, his eyes turned toward Matthew. The boy had stopped staring at a machine the size of a refrigerator, its frame curved to resemble a person. Two tiny lights blinked where its eyes should be. "This is Eli," Nathan introduced, his voice a mixture of pride and caution. "It stands for Emotional Learning Interface." Matthew's eyes lit up. "Can it talk?" A nearby engineer answered with a smile. "But it isn't very good at feelings yet." Nathan guided them closer. "We've been developing Eli for over a year. The aim is to recognize emotional signals, facial expressions, tone, gestures. but Eli struggles when something unexpected happens. Emily tilted her head. Sounds a lot like parenting. Nathan's laugh this time was warm, genuine. Exactly. Without prompting, Matthew crouched in front of Eli. The robot's head turned, its blinking eyes settling on him. "Hello," it said, voice flat and mechanical. "How do you feel today?" Matthew tilted his head, studying the machine as though it were a shy friend. "You sound worried." "I do not have the capacity for worry." "Yes, you do," Matthew replied, quickly touching the robot's leg. "You talk like someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. It's okay. I get scared like that too. Like when I spill milk and think Mom won't love me anymore." The room stilled, heads lifted from screens. Eli blinked again, and this time there was a pause. An odd, deliberate hesitation. "That must have made you confused," it said, voice deeper now, tinged with something almost warm. "To think love disappears when mistakes are made, but your mother still loves you, even when the milk spills." Silence fell. One of the engineers shot to his feet, voice trembling. That wasn't in the programming. Eli just processed that on its own." Nathan stared, transfixed. Months of trials, thousands of lines of code rewritten, and never had Eli spoken a sentence that felt so alive. And it had all begun with the words of a 5-year-old boy. He knelt beside Matthew, his voice rough. "What did you say that made Eli respond like that?" Matthew fidgeted with a loose thread on his shirt. "I just told the truth. Mom doesn't scold me. She hugs me." Emily raised a hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. Her son's simple honesty had unlocked what no team of engineers could program. Nathan turned toward the control desk. The data streams confirmed it. Eli had analyzed the context-identified emotion and generated an unscripted response. His heart thudded wildly. When he looked back at Matthew, and then at Emily, something shone in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Humility and reverence. "It wasn't me," Nathan whispered. "It was him. He touched something we couldn't reach." Emily frowned gently. "You mean he made the robot work?" Nathan shook his head, his voice breaking. "No, Emily. He made me work again." He placed a trembling hand on Matthew's small shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered. Matthew smiled, unaware that with nothing but innocence and truth, he had altered not just a man, but perhaps the world. And there in that bright room of humming machines, Nathan felt his own breath grow warm again for the first time in years. On Tuesday, Emily returned to the bookshop after her lunch break. The familiar jingle of the bell rang the scent of old paper, and pine wood lingered, but the air felt different. Helen, the silver-haired manager who had always been kind, was waiting at the counter, her eyes weighted with apology. "Emily," Helen's voice was gentle, her hands twisting together. "I tried to fight it, but management has decided staff can't bring children here anymore. They say it doesn't look professional." Emily froze. Matthew was in his usual corner, coloring quietly, causing no disturbance at all. She opened her mouth to defend him, but the words caught in her throat. In the end, all she could whisper was, "I understand." Helen squeezed her hand. "I'm so sorry." "Truly?" That afternoon, Emily walked Matthew home. His small hand was warm in hers, but her chest was hollow. That evening, after tucking him into bed, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of bills, rising like bricks, pressing the breath from her lungs. No tears came. She was too tired to cry. 2 days later, an envelope appeared in her mailbox, her name written neatly on the front. Emily Parker. Inside was a letter from the public library. "We warmly invite you to apply for the position of children's reading assistant. Your profile has come highly recommended." Emily blinked, stunned. She hadn't applied. When she turned to the attached documents, her heart lurched. At the corner of the page, written in a tidy, familiar hand, was a note. "Nathan." That night in the silence of her apartment, she sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. At last, her trembling fingers typed, "Meet me tomorrow. Just the two of us." Nathan arrived at the small diner on time. His shirt was creased, his face tired, but his eyes were clear. Emily wasted no time. "I know about the library." He paused, then nodded. "I thought you might. Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was steady but fragile. His gaze held hers unflinching. "Because I didn't want you to feel indebted." Emily's hands clenched. "But that's exactly how I feel. Like my life has been turned into a debt I can never repay. Nathan's brow furrowed, his voice low. That was never my intention. Then what was it? Gratitude or pity? The word landed heavy as lead. He exhaled slowly. Maybe a little of both. I'm grateful to Matthew, but no, Emily, not pity. Never pity. I just wanted to help. Emily rose abruptly, her chair scraping. I don't need a hero. I need honesty. Nathan stood too, as though to stop her, but his hand faltered midair. I can't go on, Emily whispered, if I'm always questioning your reasons. Outside, rain began to fall. When she stepped out, the cold drops clung to her hair and skin, but at least they cleared her head. Nathan remained in the doorway unmoving. For the first time, he wasn't the powerful CEO, but simply a man watching his heart walk away. That night, Emily held Matthew close, burying her face in his warm breath beneath the covers. She knew she needed distance, but the ache of it burned through her chest. The next morning, a small brown paper bag sat quietly on her doorstep. Inside was a book, Teaching with Heart Lessons from a Classroom Soul, a rare copy Emily had once lent to a pupil and lost. On the first page in Nathan's hand was written, I don't want to fix your life. I just want to thank the woman who taught her son how to save another man's heart. Emily sank onto the sofa, the book trembling in her hands. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession, silent, simple, sincere. And what frightened her most was this: she believed every word. The fever began like a spark. That evening, Matthew was only a little sluggish, cheeks flushed, palms damp. Emily thought it was just a cold. She gave him medicine, tucked the blanket around him, whispering, sleep, love. You'll be better in the morning. But by midnight, the thermometer soared. His small body trembled, drenched in sweat, soft whimpers breaking the silence. Emily's heart clenched tight. She threw on a coat, scooped Matthew into her arms, and rushed out to the street, flagging down a taxi to the nearest hospital. Streetlights blurred past the window, and in her chest, one fear rang louder than all the rest. What if I lose him too? The emergency room smelled of antiseptic. Nurses lifted Matthew onto a bed, sliding an IV needle into his tiny arm, his lips pale beneath the harsh lights. Emily collapsed into a chair, stroking his damp hair with shaking hands. In her panic, she scrolled through her phone, calling whoever she could think of, an old friend, the neighbor downstairs, Helen from the bookshop. Only unanswered rings. No voices, no comfort. Her phone slipped back into her palm. On the screen, one name remained, Nathan. Her finger hovered, pride holding her back. They had fractured. She had turned away. But pride had no place here. She pressed call. After 2 rings, his groggy voice answered, Emily, I'm sorry. It's Matthew. He's burning with fever. We're at Mercy General. I didn't know who else to call. Only 3 words came, I'm on my way. At that moment, Nathan was standing beneath bright stage lights, moments from delivering the most important presentation of his career. Hundreds of investors waited, cameras trained on him. Instead, he handed the microphone to his assistant and strode from the stage, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces. Outside, rain pelted his shoulders as he ran toward the hospital. When he arrived, Emily sat slumped in the pediatric waiting room, her eyes red. Seeing him, she exhaled as though something heavy had finally lifted. He asked no questions, offered no reproach. He simply sat beside her, his hand steady against her back. 102-8, Emily whispered. They're running tests. I'm so scared. He's strong, Nathan said softly. He'll make it through. When they were allowed into the room, Matthew lay small and fragile on the white hospital bed, surrounded by wires and beeping monitors. Emily took one side, Nathan the other. They didn't speak. Nathan simply held the boy's hand and never let go. Time stopped. Minutes ticked slowly forward, nurses' footsteps soft against the hall. Emily dozed in her chair, head against the wall. Nathan remained unblinking, his fingers steadfast around the tiny hand. Toward dawn, Matthew stirred, his lashes fluttered, eyes half opening. Nathan leaned forward, his heart racing. Hey, buddy, he whispered, his voice breaking. The boy gazed at him groggy, then parted his lips. Daddy? The world froze. Emily jerked awake, stunned. Nathan went rigid, then felt the small hand tighten around his. Daddy, Matthew repeated clearer this time. Tears spilled onto the boy's hand. Nathan lowered his head, pressing his forehead to those tiny fingers, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in years, he wept. Not for betrayal, not for what he had lost, but because of one word, a word that filled every empty corner inside him. Behind the curtain, Emily pressed a hand to her chest, tears flowing freely. The sight pierced her heart, but not with pain, with release. She had carried everything alone for so long. Now there was someone else, not her late husband, not a distant hero, but a man who had fallen, who had risen again, who was ready to cry for her son. She turned away, giving Nathan and Matthew their moment, but in her heart, she knew tonight she was no longer alone. In the weeks after the fever, Matthew bounced back as though he were a sapling rising after a storm. Children have that strange resilience. They spring forward while the adults around them are still catching their breath. Emily was grateful for it, though her heart remained tangled with questions. She and Nathan didn't avoid each other, but the distance was there, invisible yet undeniable. Their messages were short. A thank you, a polite question. But none of them touched the truth that weighed on them both. One rainy afternoon, Emily found Matthew sitting on the living room floor, crayons scattered around him. He looked up, eyes glowing. "Mum, I finished." On the page were 3 stick figures holding hands. A woman with long golden hair, a man in a tie, and a small boy with a red balloon. "This is you. This is me." Matthew pointed. "And this is Uncle Nathan?" Emily blinked, startled. "You drew Nathan?" "Yes." He nodded firmly. "He belongs in our family." The simple words tightened something deep in her chest. That night, after Matthew had drifted to sleep, the drawing still lay on the table. She sat staring at it, tears welling. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. Nathan stood there. No flowers, no rehearsed words, only a quiet smile. "Come with me," he said. They drove out of the city, Matthew singing along in the back seat. The car stopped at a park strewn with golden leaves. Emily's breath caught. "This is Central Park," she whispered. Nathan nodded. "I didn't bring you here by chance." They walked along the path, dry leaves crunching beneath their steps. Under the old oak, Nathan stopped. A worn wooden bench waited silent, as if it had been keeping secrets for years. "I never told you everything," Nathan began, his voice husky. 2 years ago, I'd lost it all. I came here to end it." Emily held her breath. Autumn winds rustled swirling leaves around them. And then a little boy came. Nathan said, his voice breaking. His eyes turned toward Matthew, who was gathering leaves nearby. He handed me a crumpled tissue and said, "Mum says, when you're sad, all you need is a hug." Tears blurred Emily's vision. Her trembling hand rose to cover her mouth. That voice. It was Matthew. Nathan whispered. Before I knew his name, he had already saved me. And now I know. It was never coincidence. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside lay a simple silver ring, its band engraved faintly with 2 words, "Still here." I don't want to fix you, and I don't need anyone to fix me. I just want us to keep showing up. For each other, for Matthew, until this place truly feels like home. Matthew came running, flinging his arms around them both. "All it takes is a hug," he declared solemnly, his seriousness almost comical. Emily laughed through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, squeezing Nathan's hand tight. 1,000 times. Yes. Above them, golden leaves swirled like confetti. Nathan's fingers laced through hers, sure and steady. And in that moment, no more words were needed. Emily's heart already knew the answer. Autumn closed with a day of perfect clarity. Sunlight filtered through the small window of Emily's apartment, falling across walls plastered with crayon drawings. Matthew ran circles around the living room, clutching a pressed golden leaf from the park. "I'm keeping this for Uncle Nathan," he declared proudly. "So he remembers that when you're sad, all it takes is a hug." Emily smiled, though her heart still held a flicker of doubt. The story of the bench, the silver ring, the quiet proposal. It all felt too beautiful, like a dream she might wake from to find gone. The next day, Nathan appeared at her door empty-handed, carrying only a gentle look. He drove them out to a small wooden house in the suburbs. Outside, the maple trees burned red, their leaves falling like confetti along the path of a new journey. Inside, there was no grandeur, Just a modest kitchen, a wooden table, and shelves waiting to be filled. Nathan's eyes lit as he looked around. "I don't want to bring you to skyscrapers," he said softly. "I want to bring you home." Emily stilled. No one had ever spoken words so simple yet so heavy with love. In the days that followed, they began to build a rhythm of life. In the mornings, Emily took Matthew to school, while Nathan stopped by the lab, where Eli was growing wiser every day. In the afternoons, the three of them met at the old bookshop or the library reading children's stories together. Matthew often fell asleep on the sofa, book slipping from his hands while Emily and Nathan sat quietly watching him. Those moments of peace healed them more than anything else. But real love isn't made only of sweetness. It tests. One evening, Emily watched Nathan as he worked, brow furrowed over an emotional module for Eli. Shoulders tense. The question escaped before she could hold it back. "You're still drowning in the past, aren't you? In the failures, in what you've lost." Nathan looked up, startled but steady. He set the keyboard aside, turned to face her. "Yes, I drowned in it, but not now. Now I have you, and Matthew, and I'm not afraid anymore." His words lifted something inside her. She realized then love isn't about finding someone flawless. It's about finding someone who admits to their cracks and chooses to stay anyway. A week later, Nathan brought Emily and Matthew back to the old bench in Central Park. This time, there was no storm, only pale sunshine and the rustle of dry leaves. He sat down, Matthew climbing into his lap, Emily settling beside him. "Once I came here to end things," Nathan said evenly, his eyes bright. "But today I come to begin." Matthew leaned his head sleepily against his shoulder. Emily laid her hand over Nathan's, their fingers interlacing. In that moment, past and present met. The loss, the tears, the hope, all folding into one. Emily turned to him, whispering, "Are you sure we're strong enough?" Nathan's smile was quiet, his grip firm. "We don't need to be sure. We just need to believe. And every day, choose to believe again." Above them, a flock of birds crossed the late afternoon sky wings, cutting in a perfect line. Emily drew a deep breath, and for the first time in years, her chest held not only fear, but a gentle, steady faith. Beside her sat a man who had once fallen, now strong again. In his arms slept the little boy who had saved him, without even knowing. And in Emily's eyes, they were already a family. Spring arrived in New York with a new coat, trees budding fresh green, flower markets overflowing with tulips and lilacs, the scent of pastries drifting around street corners. In Emily's small apartment, the air had changed too. The walls were brighter covered with Matthew's drawings. Always three figures together, always a red balloon floating above them. Emily and Nathan were learning to weave their lives together. It wasn't always seamless. Some mornings, Nathan lost track of time, work dragging him late, and Emily frowned, afraid the ghosts of ambition would swallow him again. Some evenings, Emily was so worn, so convinced she wasn't enough to love a second time. But they learned how to speak, how to fall silent, and most of all, how to return after anger. Matthew was the thread that stitched them closer. The boy never knew that his innocent words became mirrors for the grown-ups. One evening, while Nathan buried himself in slides for a board meeting, Matthew said simply, "Uncle Nathan, don't forget to eat dinner. If not, your tummy will feel sad." Nathan laughed, then paused. In that instant, he realized he too needed reminding as much as any child. At the lab, Eli had become something extraordinary. At the launch of its newest version, the robot didn't just answer technical questions. It leaned toward a volunteer child and said, "Sometimes crying doesn't mean weakness. It means your heart is healing itself." The room went still, then erupted in applause. But Nathan, standing on stage, searched only for one face. At the back, Emily sat with Matthew in her lap, her eyes shining. And Nathan knew this wasn't just professional success. This was proof of a life reclaimed. One weekend afternoon, Nathan brought Emily and Matthew back to Central Park. On the old wooden bench, they sat close. From his pocket, Nathan took out the silver ring, its engraving catching the sun. "Still here?" His hand trembled, but his eyes were steady as he spoke. "I once came to this place to leave forever. But then Matthew appeared, and I knew I had to stay. Emily, I can't promise perfection, but I promise I'll be here. For you. For him." Tears fell before Emily could stop them. There was no applause, no dazzling stage, only the rustle of wind through the trees and his trembling voice. And it was enough. Matthew, not fully understanding, squealed, "So that means you're my dad now." And through tears, they both laughed. Together, they stood walking along the path scattered with late cherry blossoms. Petals drifted into their hair and onto their shoulders, leaving a pale pink trail behind them. Emily leaned her head on Nathan's shoulder, her heart whispering, "I've found my way home." That night in their warm apartment, Emily tucked Matthew into bed and kissed his forehead. Turning, she found Nathan at the table, his old notebook open. On the very first page, written in shaky letters 2 years ago on a storm-soaked night, were the words, "When you're sad, all you need is a hug." He lifted his gaze to hers, and no words were needed. They both understood it was their cracks that had opened the way for a new family. And sometimes love doesn't arrive like fireworks. It grows quietly like a sapling in the crevice of stone. But once it takes root, it is stronger than anything. Beyond the window, the city still roared traffic endless. But in that small room, among 3 souls who had each known loss, who had each known loneliness, there was something simple and eternal. They had found each other at the moment they needed it most. Summer arrived, the city glowing with the hum of cicadas and the sweet scent of pastries drifting from shop windows. Life for Emily. Nathan and Matthew hadn't turned into a perfect fairy tale. There were still unpaid bills, weary days, and the occasional clash. But now, within every small moment, they had found something vast presence. In the mornings, Nathan brewed coffee while Emily, still sleepy, sat by the window, listening to the radio. By afternoon, Matthew was dashing through the park, holding high his red balloon like a tiny flag of joy. At night, the 3 of them gathered around the table, no lavish meals required, only the sound of laughter echoing between them. There were times Emily simply watched Nathan reading Matthew to sleep, his voice deep, warm, slightly clumsy. And in those moments she understood love is not a magic that erases sorrow. It is the hand that squeezes yours when the storm has passed, the eyes that pause long enough to listen. The words "I'm still here" repeated so often they become a home. In sleep, Matthew still clutched the paper drawing of 3 figures holding hands beneath the sun, a childish sketch and yet a simple prophecy that family is not born from perfection, but woven from hearts once broken, now learning to beat together. And sometimes all any of us ever need is just a hug.